Welcome to New York's number two sports show. Let's talk about the 2025 New York Giants 53-man roster. Uh, Look, I think this season, in what is Joe Schoen Brian Daboll's fourth season as GM and head coach, respectively, of the New York Giants, is obviously a very important one. And coming out of the preseason, the vibes are high. I mean, I still think we need to be realistic as far as expectations and the fact that, look, this is not likely to be a playoff team, but I think that when I look at this roster and we'll discuss each position group and where it stands right now, I think that there's definitely some positions that got better, some that are definitely concerns on both sides of the ball. Um, but I think that overall, there is more depth than there had been the last few seasons, and it's a matter of staying healthy as well. Because some of the Giants' best and key players have gotten hurt, which has further derailed things for them. So let's go right into it. And let's start with the quarterback position. This is a position that, if nothing else, not bad in terms of like your number three quarterback. So Russell Wilson is the starter, and then it's either Jackson Dart or Jameis Winston behind Wilson. Based on the way that things went in preseason, I tend to think that everything being equal, Dart is probably the backup, but like we may not know that for sure until the time comes. Um, but those are your three quarterbacks. And look, like Russell Wilson, there's going to be probably a short leash there, especially if the Giants lose games early and Wilson is not being overly productive. But still, like to go from where they were with a QB room last year of Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, and Tommy DeVito, I would definitely say that this, again, the thing is, it's only one quarterback that's in there, right? So it doesn't matter that much like who the number three QB is, but you just feel better about, if Russell Wilson got hurt or if he wasn't effective, that the next guy in could approximate or do better than that. Um, Speaking of Tommy DeVito, he is no longer a Giant, which is not a surprise. They were not likely to roster four quarterbacks. So Tommy DeVito is actually now a New England Patriot. He was claimed off waivers, and New England was the only team that put a claim in on him. It had been reported previously that the Patriots were interested in Tommy DeVito, so it's not overly surprising. And as well, DeVito looked really good in that last preseason game against the Patriots. That is a thing, which we'll kind of discuss a little bit more with other players that kind of came and went. But Tommy DeVito out. Um, Again, I don't disagree with that. I understand that, for some fans, Tommy DeVito was like in a weird way, like a cult hero of the last few years. I don't know. Like, and it's right. I'm wearing a Syracuse hat right now. And Tommy DeVito was the quarterback at Syracuse before transferring to Illinois. I just didn't feel like, look, good for him. Like the fact that he is even in this position, like, is way more than I ever would have thought. All that said, this was the right decision to make. So three quarterbacks on the roster for the Giants: Russell Wilson, Jackson Dart, Jameis Winston. Running back position, also pretty cut and dry, in my opinion. Your three running backs are Tyrone Tracy Jr., Devin Singletary, and Cam Scatterboot. So Scatterboot had a hamstring injury that he dealt with in preseason, but was able to play the last game against the Patriots. And, I think they'll probably work him in somewhat slowly, but I think once he's up to speed, I think he'll definitely have a role for sure. Third downs, passing downs, and maybe some other, maybe who knows? Like, I feel like that goal line role is kind of up for grabs with these three running backs. Devin Singletary is also still on the roster. And look, like he's nothing special at all, and is probably the least exciting of the bunch. And there's contractual obligations to Singletary, but obviously there's history there with Shane and Daboll going back to Buffalo. So Turbo Miller was actually, he was cut, but he lands back on the practice squad. And that's the thing, like, that's not surprising at all. And the Giants tried to play some roster gymnastics, which we'll talk about, which didn't work out completely successfully as they would have hoped. But for the most part, it kind of did. And in the case of Turbo Miller, like his skill set is kind of set up for preseason. Then that happens. He's got that straight line speed, but he wasn't really much of a special teams contributor, which hurts in situations like this. And look, like if there is an injury to one of those top three running backs, Turbo, in all likelihood, will be elevated to the active roster and take that spot. So to me, I have no problem with that at all. That seems simple to me. I know Turbo Miller, was there was excitement there, but this made sense. Now let's go to wide receiver. Um, this is a group that there is not great depth. Now at the top, it's good. Malik Neighbors is special, right? Like he has a chance to be one of the best wide receivers in the league, right? And he's been dealing with injuries. I think he'll be okay, but it's something to at least take note of. That you also have Darius Slayton and Wan'Dale Robinson, so not a bad trio. Um, all in all, right? If they stay healthy, you can live with that. Um, and the problem is what's behind it. So let's talk about that. Your fourth wide receiver is Jalen Hyatt, which is not good at all. And I think that um, it wasn't a great preseason for him. This is now his third season. This is a make or break year for Jalen Hyatt for sure. Um, Apparently, there was some trade interest. I believe Ryan Dunleavy. Like I would have entertained that for sure if that was a real thing. Even if you didn't get much back, I would have entertained the possibility. And look, there's wide receivers that are still out there that could be an upgrade. I don't know what's going to happen with Gabe Davis. I guess it feels like him going to the Giants isn't going to happen, but yet he hasn't signed anywhere. Um, a guy like Isaiah Hodgins was cut from the 49ers roster. Like, I think he could probably be an improvement as your fourth wide receiver. I want Jalen Hyatt to do well. It's just he's a one trick pony and he's not even really that trustworthy in that role, as in drops are a thing for him as well. And his route tree is not really expansive. So that isn't great. Your fifth wide receiver is Bo Collins, and good for him. He, I believe, was the only undrafted free agent from this year's class to make the 53-man roster, I believe. Um, and I'll correct myself if I'm wrong on that. But Bo Collins, look, like maybe there's something there down the road, and I think maybe he could play a little bit of a role on special teams. Like, but again, Bo Collins is not someone that you're going to feel great about if there's injuries. To me, this is more. Um, I don't think there's much of a plan for him to get many offensive snaps. I think that this is someone that they're going to work with, and maybe there's something there in the future. And for now, if he is active on game days, which we don't really know that he will be, I would expect to see him more on special teams. Speaking of special teams, one of the more controversial decisions is that Gunnar Olszewski was the choice over Amir Smith Marset. Now, I want to say that Smith Marset is on the practice squad, right? So, like, he could very well still be back in the mix. But Gunnar is the one that they choose to be the return man. Now, I probably would have went with Smith Marset. And I don't think like having both of them on the 53, I don't think I would have done that. I don't think that's a great use of the roster. But with Smith Marset, he has shown out as a much more profound kickoff returner. And with the new rules, I think that that's very important. As far as their punt returning, like Gunnar is not a bad punt returner at all. He was actually the punt returner before he got hurt last year in week one. He had a punt return touchdown in 2023 against the Rams and got hurt like right before I think it was the week one game against the Vikings, and was out for the season. And the Giants got Smith Marset from Carolina after they got rid of him. Um, I think both have really solid return ability. I just think that Smith Marset is a better return man, and he can do kickoff and punt. Gunnar Olszewski, I don't know what the plan is for kickoff returner. I guess it would be him. Could it be like a Devin Singletary? Maybe, which again, like, I don't think that's anything amazing. And I'd really like to think that their wide receiver abilities were not a factor in this decision, because in theory, Gunnar Olszewski is the backup slot wide receiver to Wan'Dale Robinson, but like Amir Smith Brissett could have been that as well. So I would hope that that didn't factor in. So Well, on the surface, like, okay, what's the big deal? It's just like special teams. But I think with the new rules, I think it is pretty important. And again, it's not to say that Gunnar Olszewski is not a good return man, specifically with punts. But I think that Smith Marset gives you a little more juice and kickoff returning and punt returning. As far as some of the wide receivers that didn't make it, that landed on the practice squad, I guess most notably was little Jordan Humphrey, former Bronco receiver, who, more of a veteran. He's been in the league now for about 6 years. Um, he was a cut. I think there was a chance that he was going to make it. Um, Someone who got cut earlier on, and subsequently did not land onto the practice squad was Montreal Washington. Um, and I think for him, uh, drops were a bit of an issue. And I thought that maybe he would like make it further than he did. I thought that maybe he'd be a practice squad guy, but wasn't the case. Um, this is a position that I think definitely needs work for sure. Now let's go to tight end, which actually is one that has a lot of depth. Now, similar, I guess, to like quarterback, does it necessarily have an amazing starter? No, but there were some tough decisions to be made. So the starter is going to be Theo Johnson, who is a fourth round pick last season, although he's dealing with an injury right now. So um, haven't heard anything as far as him not being available for week one, but it's something uh, to consider here. Chris Manhertz makes it. He is like the pure blocking tight end. Nothing more, nothing less. You're not going to see him with too many receptions. A little bit. Kind of to throw the defense off, but he's a good blocker. And then you have Daniel Bellinger, who was a fourth round pick in 2022, who his role is kind of diminished over time with the Giants, but I think he'll have a fairly decent role. I know there was talk, rumors that didn't come to fruition that maybe he could be a cut candidate and go elsewhere, but Daniel Bellinger's still here. And look, if Theo Johnson's out, then I think Daniel Bellinger kind of elevates into that starting tight end role, and Manhurts kind of stays where he is. Where it got interesting was Thomas Fidone the second, seventh round pick this year. Um, he makes the roster over Greg Dulcich. Now, there's a risk in the roster gymnastics, which we will talk about once we get to the defense. Um, so on the one hand, I think there was a pretty decent shot that Thomas Fidone, I think he definitely would have cleared waivers. And then in theory, he could have signed to a different practice squad. And I guess they didn't want to take that chance. And Fidone actually didn't look bad in preseason, but I thought Dulcich, who he's the opposite of Manhurts. He is purely a receiving tight end. He was a wide receiver convert, had some success with the Broncos and Russell Wilson, I believe, earlier in his career, Dulcich, and was actually on the Giants at the end of last year. Played pretty well in the preseason. Dulcich ends up signing on to the Dolphins practice squad, which kind of makes sense, right? With I think Darren Waller, like competing with him would be a place I'd want to go to just because like that's a total uncertainty. So I think Dulcich felt like he had more of a chance with Miami. And I think that's probably true. I wouldn't have minded keeping him and seeing if you could have gotten Fidone on the practice squad. I don't have a huge problem with it though, but that would have maybe been my preference when it happened. However, seeing how things played out with another seventh round Giant pick um, makes me maybe change my thoughts a little bit. Now let's discuss offensive line. The Giants keep 10 offensive linemen. Let's first discuss just the starting five from left to right. Andrew Thomas, John Runyon Jr., John Michael Schmitz Jr., Greg Van Roten, and Jermaine Illuminor. So with Andrew Thomas, I hope that he's going to be ready for week one, but I have some concern there with him. It sounds like it was a pretty rough offseason as far as surgeries were concerned and things that kind of didn't go as planned. And I think they're going to be careful with Andrew Thomas. And I think he himself is going to be cautious. So he's so important to the effectiveness of this offense. If he's out of the equation, it changes everything. So I want there to be a combination. I hope selfishly that he's good to go. But if he's not, don't push it at the same time. Be smart. Don't turn this into something bigger. The Liz Frank injury, that's a tough thing, especially for a big guy like Andrew Thomas to come back from. So my gut still tells me that he'll be ready and starting week one against the Commanders, but little over a week away from that. We'll find out. And I think practice status will be a pretty big tell next week. So, as far as the backups, you have James Hudson III, who they signed formerly of the Cleveland Browns, Marcus Bowe, who is a fifth round pick who looked pretty good in preseason, Evan Neal, who was a bust, number 7 overall pick in 2022, Austin Schlottman, the backup center, and Aaron Stinney, who's like a backup guard veteran who was on the Giants last year. A lot of these guys, I mean, pretty much, yeah, Schlottman was, I don't know if Schlottman was on the active roster. He got hurt, I think, Austin Schlottman, um, early on last year. So he wasn't really in the mix that I remember. Maybe he latched back on late in the season, but either way, Josh Azudu, who looks better at guard, shocker. He was drafted to be a guard, not a tackle. Josh Azudu was placed on IR with the designated to return. So meaning he'll be on IR for the first 4 weeks. And so he's still there. So including him, you actually have 11, which is a lot. Um, and as far as I want to just talk about some of the cuts first that made it onto the practice squad, most notably Jake Kubis, who was a UDFA that made it last year. Kubis onto the practice squad. I think that might be it as far as that goes. I could be forgetting someone that may have been in the conversation, but really, not really. There was like a vet, like a Stone Forsythe, who was a veteran who's recently with the Seahawks, may have had a chance. But anyway, um, James Hudson the third, probably he is your swing tackle. Although Marcus Bowe is really impressive. Like I think for him it's about learning and developing. But I also, in a pinch, if you had to put him in at like right tackle, I think you could live with that. I think that there's promise for Marcus Bowe. But James Hudson the third, I think he would be the guy. Like if Andrew Thomas is out, he'll be probably the left tackle. Um, they go with Austin Schlottman, which in some ways makes sense. You could move if Schmitz was ineffective or got hurt, you could move Van Roten to center and then slide in like Stinney or do something different. But Schlottman is your direct backup center. Aaron Stinney, like I said, he is really a guard only. And then that leaves you to Evan Neal. Evan Neal really shouldn't be on this team anymore. If we're being, honest with ourselves, he has not been um, really anything effective at all. Since he's been a Giant, and honestly, it was no different. His time here in the preseason was nothing impressive at all, and I think that he is someone. Uh, he's not going to be a Giant next season. Let's just put it that way. And they try to transition him over from tackle to guard. He's basically taking up a roster spot, in my opinion. Um, but at the same time, like it's no surprise at all that he's on the team. Like I'm not like saying, oh, like this is nothing to be overly critical from a decision standpoint. It's just he's a bust. That's what it is. So let's go to defense, where there's definitely probably more overall excitement, and really it starts with um, the outside linebacker edge position, where you have Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, and Abdul Carter, and also Chauncey Golston, who's kind of both inside and outside, the former Cowboy. Which actually, since we're discussing this position, Micah Parsons traded from the Cowboys to the Packers. I mean, never would have thought that would have happened. Like if you had told me, I mean, obviously just as recently as a few months ago, I would never really have thought that as a real thing. I thought that they would come to an agreement, but ultimately, there's a lot of big egos in play when it comes to Jerry Jones, and Micah Parsons is no longer in the division, which is nice. The Giants play the Cowboys in week 2 in Dallas, and um, maybe, just maybe, the Giants can beat Dallas for once. And Parsons not being there anymore is huge. He's still in the conference, and the Giants still do play the Packers this year, so they will likely see him later on. But that was a shock. And if you're a Cowboy fan, I mean, they get 2 first-round picks in defensive tackle Kenny Clark. But you got to be hurting if you're Dallas. This guy is a game wrecker. And as a Giant fan, I've seen that firsthand. and very, very relieved that he will not be in this division anymore. And yeah, it just goes to show you never know what's going to happen in the NFL. It really is like a soap opera where um, just when you think Micah Parsons is going to be Dallas Cowboy for his entire career, and there's no reason to think anything other than that, right? I mean, um, and I don't know. I'm not sure what the disconnect was there, but I would have to think that it makes the Dallas Cowboys not as dangerous of a team, especially defensively. Uh, Going back to the Giants, obviously there's excitement as far as Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, and Abdul Carter. And I think that it's going to be a rotation. They will probably, I think the ceremonial start will go to Burns and Thibodeau, but I think that Abdul Carter will replace Thibodeau. They'll also all be on the field at the same time as well. And with Dexter Lawrence, that's a formidable bunch. That's going to be the key to the Giants winning games is rushing the quarterback. And they have the abilities to do it. It's an exciting group. I'm really excited for Abdul Carter and hoping that he can make a big impact as a rookie. And it's a big, and look, Kayvon Thibodeau, it's a really big year for him in year 4 as well. So we'll see what happens there. Defensive line, besides Dexter Lawrence, not a great group. And then as well, just as far as the offense, the outside linebacker position goes, Timon Fox is now on the practice squad. And Trace Ford was in the practice squad, but actually after recent moves, was actually released from the practice squad. He was an undrafted free agent. Defensive line, Dexter Lawrence, of course, one of the best, if not the best, interior lineman in the game. And the interesting thing is that Elijah Chapman was a surprising cut based on the usage, right? I don't think Elijah Chapman was anything amazing, but they were using him at fullback. Like he was playing defense on the first and second team, and he was cut, and he's now on the practice squad. So again, like as a fan, it's like, all right, great. Like you still have the player. And clearly there was no bad blood there at all. Like they gave him a chance last year. He made the team, but this year now he starts in the practice squad. But Elijah Chapman, that was probably the biggest surprise. He was on probably all the projected 53-man rosters, but not to be. And I don't really disagree with it. But it definitely wasn't something I was expecting. As far as the rest of the group goes, um, it is Chauncey Golston, who again, he's they have him listed with the defensive line group, which is interesting, but yeah, he's kind of a hybrid between that and edge. You also have Nacho, Raheem Nunez, Roaches, Roy Robertson Harris, who was signed in the offseason, and then DJ Davidson, who was a former 5th-round pick back in 2022, who is still on the roster. He was kind of someone that was on the fringe, but gets in, and he's kind of the direct backup to Dexter Lawrence in a way. And next to Dexter Lawrence, and there's also Darius Alexander, the rookie, who had a pretty quiet preseason, the 3rd-round pick. I wouldn't expect him to have a huge role. However, the competition isn't great. So it's a little bit of a disappointing training camp for him, but I would expect Nunez, Roches, and I guess Robertson Harris to be next to Dexter Lawrence mostly in first and second down situations. But again, expect Shane Bowen to try to get creative with what he has with that advantage with the outside linebackers. As far as the inside linebackers go, it's actually it's mostly comprised of a lot of special teamers. It is, let's see here. Bobby Okereke starting next to Micah McFadden. No surprise there. Darius Muasau, he is like the next guy in, which I just wouldn't have thought that he would have been this high up the depth chart. It always feels like the Giants' inside linebacker room leaves a little bit to be desired. At the same time, they like Muasau. I kind of thought when he was drafted that he'd be more of a special teams guy. He did get an interception week 1 last year, for what it's worth, against the Vikings. And then as well, you have Chris Board, who was signed to actually decent money in the offseason, former Raven, who's really more of a special teams player, and Demetrius Flanagan Fowles, who's a former 49er, was with the 49ers for probably like 5 or 6 years, and he as well is a special teams guy. So we'll see what comes of that. I feel like it's a group that could probably use improvement, but really Bobby Okereke needs to have a bounce back. Was really good in 23, not as good last year. Needs to do well, because I'm not sure what his future holds, but I think that Okereke hopefully still has that ability that we saw a couple years ago. So, pretty straightforward with that crew. Um, and as far as the secondary, let's go to the secondary cornerback position. Starting is Paulson Adebo, who was signed recently with the Saints. Started his first 4 years of his career with New Orleans. And then the starter opposite him is either going to be Cordell Flott or Deontay Banks. I kind of feel like it might be Cordell Flott, and in some ways, that's kind of where I would go. I don't, not that Cordell Flott's anything amazing, but I think that in game action, he makes more plays than Deontay Banks, and they may split the reps as well. It may not be a straight starter situation. That's kind of the deal there. Nickel corner is going to be Drew Phillips. That's very much secure. Um, he's third round pick last season. And then the rest of the group, you have Art Green, who we saw a little bit last season with the Giants. Um, I guess he was more on the practice squad, but he was on the active roster a little bit. So Art Green makes the team. Nick Jones, who had a good start to training camp. He was on the Kansas City Chiefs. Nick Jones is going to be the backup nickel corner to Drew Phillips. Um, and originally making the initial 53-man roster was Corey Black, but he actually was cut when the Giants made a couple of claims, which we'll now talk about. And with Corey Black, he clears waivers and he ends up signing with the Jets practice squad, which is kind of interesting. I don't think that was anticipated, and that's what I'm talking about, where roster gymnastics can go wrong. Usually, Joe Schoen has almost always kept his draft picks from that season. Corey Black, look, he was a late 7th-round pick. It shouldn't be overly consequential, but he made the initial 53-man roster. Clearly, they valued him some, and he decided to go to the Jets. And it's funny how that works because the Jets and Giants had joint practices. So the Jets, out of every team besides the Giants, saw Corey Black the most and like what they saw, and he goes to the Jets. What the Giants ended up doing, actually kind of firing back in a way, is the Giants signed Zaire Barnes, a linebacker, I believe an inside linebacker, who was on the Jets to their practice squad, because Zaire Barnes is another guy who I believe made the initial 53 with the Jets, was cut, and then the Giants signed him to the practice squad. So kind of a back and forth between the Giants and Jets on that one. So Corey Black is gone. So in terms of like players that like were, I don't know, like ones that are no longer with the team at all, of consequences, like Tommy DeVito, Greg Dulcich, and Corey Black. I think those are kind of the main ones um, that I can think of that are like not even on the practice squad. Um, Trey Hawkins, he was actually waived slash injured. The 6th-round pick in 2023 and what was going to be his 3rd year. Trey Hawkins just, had that hype in that first training camp and actually started the first game, but unfortunately was injured and kind of ineffective. So he was waived. And the Giants made a couple of claims, which led to Corey Black being cut and Gunnar Olszewski, at least temporarily, but Olszewski's back on the 53-man roster. Um, let's talk about the one that's not as important, if you will. Rico Payton, who's with the Saints. He's actually injured right now with a hamstring injury. He'll be back probably within 4 weeks. So he was put on IR. So their hope was they were going to put Rico Payton on IR and then just put Corey Black on the roster. No, that's not true. They were going to put him on IR, right? And Gunnar Olszewski took that spot, and they were just going to have Corey Black be on the practice squad. Rico Payton is really a pure special teams guy. And then as well, Bo Braid is going to be the 4th safety. So it's Dane Belt. So Tyler Nubin, Javon Holland, Dane Belton, and Bo Braid. Bo Braid's probably more of a special teams guy. He was with the Ravens, actually made the Ravens last year as an undrafted free agent. I think there is some upside to him actually playing some defensive snaps, but you kind of knew when the initial 53 came out, they only had 3 safeties. So you knew they were going to be looking for that. The Giants cut Raheem Lane, who landed back on the practice squad. He was probably most considered for the 4th. They had signed Kayvon Wallace, and that didn't work out. Safety who had been with the Seahawks. But yeah. So that's your four safeties. Again, Nubin, it's not a bad group. I think Nubin can grow as a second year safety, and Javon Holland, who they got from the Dolphins, taking over that Jason Pinnock role, but really, with more versatility. Dane Belton as the third safety, then Bo Braid uh, occupying that fourth spot, and I think we'll see him mostly on special teams. Um, and then the unit stays the same on special teams. Graham Gano kicking, Jamie Gillen punting, Casey Kreider long snapper. Graham Gano, I think there's been injuries and ineffectiveness, so I'm looking for him to kind of bounce back after what has been a couple of rough seasons. Jude McAtamney is on the practice squad. So if anything happened to Gano, they could go to him, or they could go outside the organization. Let's see some more practice squad names that I didn't mention. Um, Elijah Garcia, defensive lineman on the practice squad. Brian Hudson, I think that was kind of the one. He's also a center. He's now on the practice squad. Jordan Riley, former seventh round pick by the Giants a few years ago. He's also on the practice squad, among others. So that's pretty much a look at your 2025 roster, which always fluctuates, right? Like, I'm recording this on 2 Fridays before the opener. And I'm sure there's gonna be a lot that changes, before then. But wanted to kind of wait for the dust to settle before discussing this. And I feel pretty good about where it is right now. And yeah, I think if nothing else, this season will provide entertainment, especially with the quarterback room being what it is. And with Adil Carter potentially really being a game-changing type player on defense. So there's some things to look forward to. I think there's definitely more juice. I don't think that this is a playoff team. I think that the Giants will finish somewhere in the 6-11 range, give or take. It's a tough schedule, but look, like, that can be overrated at times. Like, things can change quickly with injuries or just surprises. But yeah, it's going to be fun. It's really important for the Giants to get up to a good start. I think at Washington and at Dallas, you have to find a way to win one of those games. You lose both, and I think it could take a similar turn that what we've seen in recent seasons. As good as things kind of feel right now, coming off of a strong preseason, that only means so much. So I think it's very important for them to get off to a good start, and that can set the tone for the rest of the season. But again, this is the 2025 New York Giants 53-man roster.